Okay, my friends, it is another video today on Wednesday, April 23rd, because Trump just put out a very unfair response to Zelensky and the peace process, and I want to cover that. I put this video out earlier about the embarrassing peace talks debacle. The what they had floated that they were going to say or try to get Ukraine to agree to was just not. It was a non-starter, and Zelensky came out and said, if you start talking about taking away territory, it's a non-starter. So the peace talks fell apart, and so Trump comes out with this very unfair response. And we're going to listen to it. You tell me if you think it's unfair, if you think it's fair. Okay, let's listen to this. Okay. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is boasting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. Well, that's been their position for years. Anything to the contrary of that is a change of their position. You know that that's what their position is. Okay. Now, Russia is also saying that they will not recognize that it's not Russian land. So let's try to be fair all through this process. This statement is very harmful to the peace negotiations with Russia in Crimea that was lost years ago under the auspices of President Barack Hussein Obama. And it's not even a point of discussion. Well, but it is. It's a point of discussion for the Ukrainians still. And yes, it was lost under Obama. Now, with that loss under Obama, back in 2017, this is what Donald Trump tweeted out. Crimea was taken by Russia during the Obama administration. Was Obama too soft on Russia? Well, that's a good question. If Obama was too soft on Russia, what does that make Trump right now? The reply here by Ostap Yarish, he's a media advisor for Razom for Ukraine, and journalist, saying during his first term, Donald Trump criticized Obama for being too soft on Russia and for letting Putin take Crimea. Is the president going to be too soft on Russia now, too? Well, that's fair, right? I mean, that is what he's saying. Okay. Nobody is asking Zelensky to recognize Crimea as Russian territory. But it seems like they were. It seems like people got word that that was what was going to be in this new package. And when Zelensky preemptively came out and said, we're not even going to be talking about that, that's not even going to be on the table, Rubio, I don't know what the timeline is. Maybe Rubio had indigestion and he decided to bail for other reasons, but Rubio bailed, leaving General Kellogg holding the bag. And then because it was only Kellogg, other people, other foreign ministers weren't going to be there. And the thing kind of imploded. I talked about that here in these three big stories today. Okay, if he wants Crimea, why didn't they fight for it 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a shot being fired? Because Ukraine was remarkably weak in 2014 relative to where they are right now. They didn't have the resources. They didn't have the ability. So that's why. It's inflammatory statements like Zelensky's that makes it so difficult to settle this war. Okay, but let's be fair again. If that's an inflammatory statement, when Peskov makes it clear Russia won't give up any illegally occupied land, demanding a full withdrawal from the four regions for peace, they're not even including Crimea here, and Crimea was stolen from them as well. And Trump parrots this logic, pressuring Ukraine to accept imperialist claims instead of defending sovereignty. Isn't this inflammatory rhetoric as well? I mean, you got to say it's fair. It's got to be one thing or the other. It can't just be one side's being inflammatory and the other's not being inflammatory. Like, I'm just trying to work our way through this, and you tell me what you think. Okay. If he wants Crimea, why didn't he do it? This is an inflammatory statement. He can have peace or he can fight for another 3 years before losing the whole country. I mean, if that's the position, then I think Zelensky has chosen to continue to fight. I mean, there's not really a question here. I have nothing to do with Russia, and he's putting that clause in because of the Russia hoax, or he doesn't want to be tied to that sort of thing, or that he's, okay, I think that's what that clause is about. I could be wrong, but I have much to do with wanting to save, on average, 5,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers a week. The order he always talks about is Russian and Ukrainian, never the other way around. Soldiers a week. And it's 5,000 Russian soldiers a week who are dying for no reason whatsoever. 5,000 would be a really high number. If you just do some quick math, let's say a third of the soldiers that are fighting each week are killed in action, not just wounded. Let's just use that as a rough cut. And then there's like maybe 1,000 to 1,500 per week. So, I mean, maybe you have 10,000 a week that are killed or wounded off the battlefield. And okay, you're looking at both sides, but the number seems high. Okay. The statement made by Zelensky today will do nothing but prolong the killing field. That's a Russian talking point right there. It's you're just making it harder on yourself. You're just prolonging the inevitable. The man with no cards, referring back to the White House that Friday afternoon infamous meeting, the man with no cards to play should now finally get it done. The only person that really wants to get it done is Trump. Neither Putin nor Zelensky are in the hurry that he's in. This complete and total mess that would have never started if I were president. He likes reaffirming that, and that's what he put out on Truth Social. Okay, was it fair? Well, again, I would say if Peskov is saying the same thing that Zelensky is saying in reverse, shouldn't you be saying something about the Russian position as well? Now, Dmitry Medvedev was saying this: Kyiv's refusal to recognize Crimea as Russia harms negotiations to resolve the conflict. And he went into something almost incoherent here. But wait a minute, he's saying the same thing as Zelensky, but in reverse. This commentary, here's Jay Powell's. As I've said, Zelensky and the anti-Trump cabal in Brussels and London have decided it's a no to peace, but so have the Russians by taking their stance. So I saw this. This is Stephen Pfeiffer. Stephen Pfeiffer's affiliated to Stanford and the Brookings, retired Foreign Service officer and ambassador. It would be good to see Trump, for once, come out with a lengthy criticism of Putin like he does with Zelensky. Like he actually did say the other day that Putin started the war. He actually did say that once. That's the first time I ever heard it. But like, where's the criticism of the other side? If it's true that what Zelensky said is bad because it's keeping from peace, then the opposite being said from the Russians is also keeping from peace. Okay. Michael McFowle says, how did recognition of Crimea suddenly out of the blue become part of these negotiations? And why is Trump insisting on it? Sometimes it feels like the Trump team are deliberately looking for ways to sabotage these talks. It does kind of feel like that. It doesn't feel like they're bringing their A game in order to get it done. Okay, so Marco Rubio came out today and said this, and then I'll show you what J.D. Vance said.
This is a terrible war and it needs to end. Because it has no military solution. There is no military solution to this war. We have to be frank. Russia's not just going to roll over Ukraine and take the whole country, and Ukraine's not going to push them all the way back to where they were before 2014.
Okay, maybe not. We just don't know about that, but we know it'll be harder without U.S. support, but we also know that the Ukrainians are going to keep going.
So what I would say we're involved in is understanding what is the Russian position. We have a better understanding of that now because
we do understand the Russian position very well in the United States.
We've spoken to them after 3 years of not speaking to them. What is the Ukrainian position? And figure out.
Well, but do you actually understand the Ukrainian position? Have you said anything that's actually going to help the Ukrainian position actually move forward? It seems like you're demanding a lot from Ukraine and not demanding very much at all. Remember how Trump said that he was going to arm Ukraine to the teeth if Putin didn't come to the table? But it's been a month and Putin still hasn't come to the table.
Are these guys even in the same neighborhood? Because if they're in completely different zip codes, then we may have to conclude that they're so far apart that peace is impossible at this time. We've done our best. We've put a lot of time and energy at the highest levels of our government. We'll continue to be willing to do so as long as there's a realistic path forward. If at some point we determine that we're just too far apart and not enough movement is happening, we may need to move on to other priorities because there are a lot of important things happening in the world. This is not our war. We didn't start this war. We're trying to help everybody end it.
Okay, so he's setting it up to walk away from the table. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe it won't. I don't know. J.D. Vance is saying the same kind of thing. Listen to this.
We've issued a very explicit proposal to both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process.
Listen to that. Say yes or for the U.S. to walk away from the process. We'll talk in another video about what that would mean, who would benefit, that sort of thing. But it's really interesting. Now, President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, has left for Russia to meet with Putin, according to the radar. Axios reports their meeting will take place on Friday, April 25th. How about that? All right. Now, Michael Weiss wrote this. It was never about the minerals. It was never about peace. It was never about Zelensky's wardrobe. It was never about taxpayer money spent on weapons and ammunition. It was always about realigning with Russia, whatever the cost. That hasn't worked out well. The last president that was just staunchly anti-Russia was Reagan. The Soviet Union collapsed under Bush. And so, yeah, let's try to realign. But every president since has been trying to press the reset button with Russia, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And it's not going to work here, more than likely. Now, the Russians on Russian state media are saying this: we will find a good place in Moscow for a Trump Tower, and thus Trump will immortalize himself and the improvement of our relations with a visual symbol. Yeah, if Mr. Trump wants to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, I think that's what he's saying. Now, if you think it's just that, it's not just that simple, and I don't think Trump would. I think he's smart enough not to do something like that while he's president. But the Moscow Times says to attract Trump, the Kremlin is pitching a 150-story Trump Tower Moscow, preferential rare earth deals, and its leverage with Iran and North Korea. So there are, in Trump's minds, benefits for aligning with Russia, and that's what they're really after. In its return for America's tacit recognition of Russian dominance over post-Soviet countries, like, you let us have our sphere and we can make these deals. And yeah, and this war would never have happened if the Ukrainians just would have rolled over and allowed Russia to be the chief form of influence over Ukraine. Okay. Now, with all that being said, in spite of all that was said today, Zelensky still said this: emotions have run high today, but it's good that 5 countries met to bring peace closer: Ukraine, the USA, the UK, France, Germany. The sides expressed their views and respectfully received each other's positions. It's important that each side was not just a participant, but contributed meaningfully. The American side shared its vision. Ukraine and other Europeans presented their inputs, and we hope that this is exactly a joint work that will lead to lasting peace. We are grateful to partners. Ukraine will always act in accordance with its constitution. Okay, that last little bit was very important and telling, because they can't recognize these other districts or oblasts that have been stolen from them. So but look how diplomatic that statement was. I mean, it was. I couldn't have written it myself. I'm fired up, and I'm sure Zelensky is. Okay. Couple last things. Russia is already 28 times larger than Ukraine, and yet it demands more land in exchange for peace. How does that make any sense? That's right. What do you need? 29 times the size? 30 times the size? And now I'll leave you with this, just because you could use a smile on this day of pretty bad news. A mama duck adopts orphan ducklings without hesitation. So this police officer is dropping the ducklings in the pond, and here comes some mama duck coming to fetch these ducklings that are not her own and take care of them and lead them wherever they need to go. I don't know, maybe they're going for lunch or whatever. At any rate, my friends, that's all that I have. Thank you for the time, the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.